that side of the screen. Otherwise, that would, yes, as you can see, Lucas showing up on his video.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this afternoon's session of Asia Water Forum 2022. My name is Asif Chima. I'm Director of Urban and Social Sector East Asia Department at Asian Development Bank. In today's session, the key topic for discussion is what are the new methods for managing risks that yield practical value to climate action? As we all know, water is essential to life on Earth, and water, like energy, plays a critical role in tackling climate challenge. It was said in this morning's session that water solutions are also climate adaptation solutions. A recent intergovernmental panel on climate change IPCC report suggests that temperature rises will be accompanied by big changes in the planet's water cycle, with areas that are already wet becoming much wetter and already arid areas becoming prone to greater drought. The report found that extreme rainfall intensifies by 7% for each additional 1 degree centigrade of global heating. With the likelihood of increasing climate threats and extreme weather events, including sea level rise, droughts, and flooding, policymakers, national governments, municipalities, communities, private sector businesses, and individuals need to move toward a greater understanding of the risk impacts to human lives, property, agriculture, economies, and the environment. In today's session, we will talk about some of these risks and highlight some solutions and technologies to understand, measure, and manage them. We are joined by some brilliant experts who are working in different parts of the ecosystem to understand and manage water-related risks and build resilience. Before we start with the presentations, let me introduce Cheng Gun, who is Young Water Professional Rapporteur, reporting on this session. Cheng Gun is Specialist Water Sector Sustainability Activity, Millennium Challenge Account, Mongolia. A couple of other reminders. I would like to remind audience that they may post their questions in the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of the screen. We will have 5 presentations of 10 minutes each before we move to the Q&A. With this, I would like to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Naota Hanasaki. Dr. Hanasaki is Head of Climate Change Impacts Assessment Research Section, Center for Climate Change Adaptation at National Institute for Environmental Studies. He earned a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate in civil engineering from the University of Tokyo. His research focuses on hydrology and water resources engineering, particularly development of a macro-scale physically based hydrological model incorporating major human activities such as irrigation, water withdrawal, and reservoir operation. He applies it for various global change issues, including climate change impact assessment and global sustainable development. He has authored or co-authored more than 100 peer-reviewed research papers. With this, I would like to hand over the floor to Dr. Naota Hanasaki.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start my presentation. And then today I'm going to talk about water risk assessment tool. I myself is Naota Hanasaki, and I'm working at National Institute for Environmental Studies, Japan. And actually, I'm hydrologist and an active researcher here. Today, I'm going to talk about 2 things. The first, in my first part of my talk, I'm going to introduce the water risks and then some key concepts. And then in the latter half of my talk, I'm going to introduce the latest available technology, and especially focusing on the models and then the water risk tools. So today, I'm going to talk about the water risks, and then the water risks has a broad meaning, and then it covers many risks, and sometimes it has a physical and social aspects, and sometimes the quantity and the quality aspects, and sometimes global and then regional scales, And water risks includes the drought and floods issues, or water scarcity issues and water excess issues. So today, I'm going to focus on the physical and quantitative and global issue, and particularly focusing on the drought or the water scarcity issues. So, and then there are many, today I'm also focusing on the recent important trend, that is the many, currently the many private sector are actively participating for this. Private sector is now interested in the climate change and then SDGs, and then particularly that so the private companies are trying to address these issues, and this is partly based on the recent investing trend of the environmental social governance investing. And then currently that most of the private sectors are keen on the climate change issues and SDGs, but what are the next? And then many companies are now also interested in the global water scarcity issues. And therefore, the global water scarcity information for private sector. So that is one. So today I'm going to focus on. So then to provide water risk information for the private sectors. So these are the key things. So today I'm going to focus on the global water scarcity and what are the drivers of this global water scarcity. I think that there are three key drivers. One is the population and economic growth, or basically this increases in water demand. The second thing is the globalization, or accelerating international trade and then global enhancing the global supply chain. And this causes the propagation of the cause and effect of the water risks to the distant areas. And the last thing is climate change, and then it makes the water supply unstable. So the key interests of the private sector or the private companies are, for example, their business continuity, business sustainability, or the overall long sustenance of their business. And many private companies are working on that recently for the environmental disclosure and the reporting. And they are seriously seeking for the countermeasures or actions to take. So to support the private companies such activities, water risk assessment tools are currently very actively used. So these assessment tools are primarily currently used for the screening. Screening means to identify where the water risks are, and the most used tools are the WRI's Aqueduct and then WWF Water Risk Filter. These tools are accessible from the internet and freely and very easily. And then many private companies are using these tools to identify where their business water risks are. But there are some limitations for these current available tools. For example, one is the difficulty in interpreting the results or the cause and effect. It means that these tools clearly tells where the water risks are high or low, but it seldom tells why the water risk is high or low. And then other thing is that these tools tells where and how much, but it seldom tells what should be done. So, and therefore our group are focusing on what are the next generation water risk tools. And then we are developing interesting global water hydrological modeling that is called the HO8. HO8 is a global hydrological model including human activities. And then this shows a schematic diagram of this model. I cannot go into detail, but it can simulate not only the natural hydrological cycle, like precipitation, evaporation, and then river discharge, but also measure human activities like irrigation water use or industrial or domestic water use. And also that it includes the many water management function like reservoir operation and so on. So this model can simulate the measure human natural water cycle and then human water use globally at a very high spatial and temporal resolution. But the problem is that it is too much detail and it is quite difficult to show the key results to the public. So therefore, we have developed the HO8 water risk tool or the viewer of this model. This shows a screenshot of this viewer, and actually it shows that map of water stress index. So yeah, that this base map is a global map, but we can easily zoom in or zoom out. And then currently that it shows the water risk in the Asian region. And typically the private companies are interested in some water risk at a specific site. And then if we click here or some places, and then three or four, the window pop up. First, let me introduce the map. And the map shows that the water stress index, and then it shows that the water stress in the 5 categories from very low to very high. And then typically the companies are interested in some water risk at a specific point. And if you click here, some point, and then pop-up windows appears. And then this is a unique function of this viewer, that it shows the time series of the index. And then the users can easily see that where the water stress is increasing or decreasing, or what are the trends. And another important function is that it also tells that some relevant factors for the index, like what are the trend of the water usage and what are the trend of the water availability and many others. By using these factor informations, the users can easily tell that what are the reasons behind the change in the water stress or water risks. So actually this tool is the first version is completed and available at the internet, but still we are still working on development, and then collaboration with university and the manufacturing companies and consulting companies, and then we are still making the improvement for this viewer. So then let me conclude my talk. The first thing is active participation of private sector is a key to address global water issues. And then spatial temporary detailed global assessments of future water related risks are key to interest. And then water risk assessment tool developed by our group will be potentially useful, which provides the latest science-based information for non-specialists. And relevant activities should be further promoted to achieve a water secure world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hanasaki, for a very interesting presentation. I'm sure the viewers would have a number of questions, but we will first move on with our next presenter, and we will come back to you with the set of questions, the Q&A panel. Our next presenter is Dr. Faisal Moin Qamar. Dr. Faisal leads the food security and climate services related work at International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. He is responsible for framing geospatial information-based approaches to support the decision-making process in the agriculture sector, and also contributes to capacity building through close engagement with local, national, and international partners. His work spans across ICIMOD's 8 regional member countries, with a special focus on Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan. With this, I would like to invite Dr. Faisal to take the stage, please. Over to you, Dr. Faisal.
Thank you very much, Asif Sahib. Thank you very much, Asif Sahib. The risk preparedness tools I'll be talking about today are developed under Survey Hindukush-Himalayan Region Program, which is a joint development initiative of USAID, NASA, ICIMOD, and its national partners in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan. The initiative connects space to village by using Earth observation data collected by satellite to help solve development challenges. So conventionally, technology-dominated disciplines are driven by supply side with little focus on end user. This results in disconnect between cutting-edge technical products that are developed and specific needs by the user. The survey program follows its service planning tool, which ensures active engagement of stakeholders, including national, regional, and global, in solving and solution design, and also emphasizing simplicity to make it handy for the practitioners and decision makers in the national agency. In the survey initiative, my focus of my work is on climate, water, and agriculture. In our larger need assessment, we found that the scope of need of Earth observation-based information provisioning for various nature of decision, including agriculture sustainability assessment and policies, decision support tools for seasonal assessment, farmer level advisories, and as well as for climate risk financing and loss and damage sharing. I'll be presenting a snapshot of our collaborative work in these areas for enhancing national capacity for improved water and food security decision making. I'll start with an example from Pakistan. In semi-arid conditions of Pakistan, mismatch of cropping practices and its water availability causing serious threat to sustainability in the long-term practices and productivity. ICIMOD, in collaboration with Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, is updating agroecological zones of Pakistan as part of the agriculture transformation and envisaged by the government to in the interest of growers, consumers, and the industry. The use of remote sensing products are contributing to clear understanding of cropping practices, holistic change along the time, and then providing some way forward to look into the future scenarios for best practices to support crop zoning and policy formulation. So this was about the long-term planning, the use of Earth observation tools and technologies. Then there's another time span which I mentioned is seasonal scale. The regional drought monitoring and outlook system is developed in collaboration with Johns Hopkins University. In survey program, we mostly collaborate with US institutions and NASA excellence centers. And the regional drought monitoring outlook system is developed and deployed at ICIMOD to facilitate data analysis, aggregation, and informed agriculture planning, decision making, with focus on Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan. The Nepal's National Drought Watch is linked to its National Agriculture Advisory Process. And in Bangladesh, the products are being used by Bangladesh Agriculture Research Council. And most recently, in the ongoing drought crisis in Afghanistan, the General Directorate of Livestock Animal Health Afghanistan utilized these drought data products to develop drought response plan for livestock sector. So when I'm talking about these product development, ICIMOD also facilitates knowledge sharing and we'll be holding our next knowledge sharing regional knowledge sharing event on 16th and 17th of August, primarily being hosted by Servir Mekong, supported by ECMOD. I invite you all to join the forum and register in the event to hear more about our drought work in this region. Another important tool which we are working is high impact water assessment toolkit, which provides 54-hour outlook for precipitation, wind speed, lightning, and hail threats. This is a tool primarily developed by NASA short-term prediction research tools support. And we are collaborating with Bangladesh Meteorological Department to provide those forecasts and ingest into the early warning system in the national and subnational level. So moving forward, I have been talking about some of the advisory platforms which are broader in nature, agriculture as well as other sector. Here I would like to mention a particular one where we are trying to bring digitization in the agriculture sector. We are working with the Ministry of Agriculture and Development in Nepal and deploying in-season crop area assessments and as well as crop damage assessment process. And last year, these platforms were used to assess major flood damage assessment by the government of Nepal to compensate farmers across the Tarai region, plain region of Nepal. So while we have some fascinating tools developed in collaboration with NASA and other technology partners, Last Mile Connect is also extremely important, especially when we talk about agriculture sector. In the SKH region, most of the farmers, particularly smallholder farmers, are dependent on public sector extension system and the advisory based on that. Here we are trying to improve performance of public extension system by integrating ICT technologies and setting up institutional mechanism also to transfer technology supported forecast to the farmers in an effective way. So this work is piloted in Chitwan, which has huge potential for scaling across this region, as we know that extension system, the structure is similar in South Asia region. So this is one example that we are focusing on Last Mile Connect. And here I will close my conversation by looking forward that we wish to continue working with national institutions for adoption of those technologies. Technology adoption is a slow process, and we need to move forward with national institutions for this work. We also wish to utilize these tools and products with multilateral development banks like ADB. For those products can be utilized in their risk financing mechanisms. We are looking forward to promoting these data products, particularly in loss and damage assessment. We know that most of our adaptation measures are not working, and we are ending up on the losses. And we need to establish mechanism where we can share losses with communities. We are integration of climate risk hydrologic capacity assessment in policy formulation and language formulation. We started with Pakistan, but we wish to continue this work in other regions. Thank you very much, Asif.
Thank you very much, Dr. Faisal, for your very interesting presentation and examples from many countries. I'm sure, again, some of the work that you have done, I have a number of questions, but I'm sure audience would like to hear more about some of these examples. I would first continue with our presentations. And our next presentation is with Mr. Michael Eastman. Mr. Eastman is a hydrological analyst at the UK Centre for Hydrology and Ecology. He joined the Hydrological Status and Outlooks Group at CEH in November 2018. His primary research centers around hydrological statistics. Michael holds a Master's of Science in Data Sciences and a Bachelor's of Science in Ecology. With this, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Eastman. Thank you.
Hi, thanks very much for the introduction. Yes, so I'm Michael. It's good to see you all, and I'm here to speak to you briefly about some work we've been doing with a consortium of people looking at how drought indicators relate to drought impacts. And specifically a kind of a detailed look into Thailand and how these indicators relate to impacts on agriculture and vegetation. So we know that droughts are complex compound effect events that can develop slowly in any climate. In the first instance, droughts develop through deficits in precipitation compared to what would be expected for a given time of year. But as precipitation deficits then move or propagate through the hydrological cycle, other types of droughts can develop. For example, agricultural droughts develop when soils start to dry, and hydrological droughts when deficits are starting to become observed in river flows. These sorts of droughts have significant effects on people, the economy, and the environment, and can be extremely costly. So droughts at the global scale are projected to increase in their severity and frequency under climate change. So it's important that we properly manage and increase our resilience to them. Severe droughts, such as those in the recent past, as you can see here, so this is the 2010, 2015, and 2020 droughts, had significant impacts on crop yields, which had big economic impacts. The 2005 agricultural areas in 66 provinces across Thailand were damaged by the drought, affecting over 70,000 villages, with damage estimated at approximately 7.5 million Thai baht. So monitoring and early warning is crucial to integrated drought management and building resilience so we can track the current situation and take action to mitigate the impacts of drought at the right time and right location. What we wanted to do in STAR was improve the resilience to droughts by understanding the links between the impacts and the indicators, so we can better understand what the indicators we use to monitor droughts actually mean or are likely to mean in terms of impacts on the ground for the agricultural sector in Thailand. This means we can better inform our drought planning and response to alleviate and mitigate the very costly impacts of drought in the future. So in this presentation, I'm going to show you the links between commonly used meteorological drought indices and vegetation indices, which show the impact of drought on vegetation to assess how we can best use meteorological drought indicators to monitor drought impacts in Thailand. It brings together different work streams within STAR, which is the project this was all done under, where we've talked with key agricultural stakeholders about which drought indices they currently use and would be useful to use, and also what drought impact data are available in Thailand and what impacts they are most concerned about. So standardized meteorological indicators such as SPI, the Standardized Precipitation Index, and SPEI for different accumulation periods are often used in drought monitoring and early warning systems. But what we're interested in is how they actually relate to the impacts on the ground. So we've taken two approaches to look into this, two complementary approaches. First of all, there's this correlation analysis, very simple correlation analysis, so we can see how strongly commonly used meteorological drought indicators are linked to agricultural drought impacts. To this end, we use remote sensing vegetation indicators as proxy for drought impacts, and then analyze the correlation between the indicators and standardized meteorological indicators for different accumulation periods. So SPI and SPEI from 1 to 24 months. So we've got kind of short deficits in SPI and SPEI, as well as long deficits up to 2 years. Then we also had a look at kind of a random forest approach. So looked at how we can simulate crop yield, take a more direct approach rather than using this proxy. And it allows us to answer slightly more specific questions about how this starts to vary between different crops and in different areas. So in order to carry out the correlation analysis between the indicators and the vegetation indicators as proxy, we first need to verify that the assumption that vegetation indicators are a good proxy for agricultural drought impacts is valid. So the left map shows the dominant crop in each province. You can see that across most of Thailand, the dominant crop in each province is paddy rice. Whereas this second, I'm not sure you can see my cursor, but there's the second map from the left shows the correlation between the crop yield data and VCI, which is one of the remote sensing indicators that we studied. So VCI is based on vegetation only. The crop yield data we used were the ones from Thai's Office of Agricultural Economics webpage. And we can see for most provinces, the correlation between the vegetation indicator, what we're using as the proxy, and crop yield is high and significant. So it validates that assumption that this is a good proxy for crop yield. The third map from the left shows the correlation between crop yield data and VHI, this Vegetation Health Index, which is another remote sensing indicator which we have studied. This is based on vegetation and temperature and therefore incorporates the effect of heat stress on plants. And see for most provinces in Western Thailand, the correlation between the vegetation indicator and crop yield is high and significant. And then this final map, this one on the right, just shows the dominant land cover type in Thailand. You see in this kind of yellowy orange color, the vast majority of provinces where crops are, this is the crop area. The majority of provinces where crops are the dominant land cover, so the light brown, the correlation between vegetation indicators and crop yield is good. Therefore, for the rest of the analysis, we assume that vegetation indicators are a good proxy for agricultural drought impacts. So we initially split the correlation analysis into different seasons, so we can see the different effects and also compare these different seasons. So these plots are showing the dry season. So the two maps on the left show the maximum correlation between VCI, so this is our proxy for drought impacts, and the meteorological indicators, so SPI and SPI. And we've also separated crop and forest. So the two maps on the right, however, show which meteorological indicator is the most correlated to VCI. So in blue, if it's blue, it's SPI. If it's red, it's SPEI. And the darker the color, the longer the accumulation period that was observed. So this in this region down here in the kind of south region, you can see this dark blue. This is an SPI 18-month accumulation. So we can see here for crops that there's very high significant correlations everywhere between meteorological indicators and drought impacts. And when we look on the map on the right, so map C, we can see that for most regions, the meteorological indicator that's correlated to impacts is generally SPEI for short to medium accumulation periods. For forests, we observe a north-south split. So you can see we've got this kind of red color in the north, where there's high correlation between meteorological droughts and indicators and drought impacts. And in the south, we've got this blue. And if we look at the plot on the right, so plot D, you can see that for most correlated meteorological indicators, there's more mix between SPI and SPEI in the south, which is known for being the wettest part of Thailand. The correlations are negative. You can see that in plot B. And this blue mean that the droughts are actually favorable to vegetation growth. When we look at plot D, we see that in the south, the meteorological indicator most correlated vegetation indicators in this case is for very short accumulation periods. So this suggests that very short drought can in the south have a positive effect on forest growth. This area of Thailand is not water limited, therefore a decrease in rainfall for a short period does not affect the natural vegetation there. And if we have a quick look at the wet season, so these plots are the equivalent plots just for the wet season now. So the correlation between meteorological indicators for crops and drought impacts in map A are still positive, but the correlations are weaker. Also, when we look at the meteorological indicators most correlated to drought impacts, map C, you see it more mixed than for the dry season, with a mixture of SPI and SPEI. But generally, we're looking at much longer accumulation periods. Therefore, for crops, impacts are seen for long droughts that have started in the dry season. So potential that what we're picking up here is a signal that actually the important period for when the impacts are occurring is the drought in the dry season. For forest, most provinces' correlation between meteorological indicators and drought impacts, so map B, are negative, suggesting that decrease in rainfall amount during the wet season can contribute to increased vegetation growth of forest. MACD shows that for the majority of provinces, it's short accumulation SPEI that has the highest correlation. Short droughts with high evaporative demand contributes to increased forest growth. I think I'm close to running out of time, so I'm going to skip through the random forest models, which effectively just give us a kind of closer look at some of these results, and we can kind of divide different crops out and things like that. And instead just jump to the conclusions and the next steps very quickly. So to conclude, associations between drought indicators and impacts are not consistent across the country or even across crops. Instead, they're location and combination specific. It's more complicated than one single pattern. However, meteorological droughts and vegetation health indicators explain some of the variability observed in crop yields. So this suggests that some of these products might be able to underpin enhanced drought monitoring and forecasting approaches which seek to better mitigate drought impacts. So the next impacts are to produce intuitive, easily understandable star sheets to clearly communicate these findings to non-specialists, as well as we've successfully secured additional funding to more comprehensively explore these questions, as well as roll it out across more of Southeast Asia, for example, Malaysia and Indonesia. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your presentation. With this, we can now move to our next presenter. Our next presenter is Mr. Bikash Pati. Mr. Pati is a technical specialist with WaterAid in India. Previously, he held the position of program officer with the same organization. Prior to that, he was the program manager at Regional Center for Development Cooperation in Odisha, India. His work in water and sanitation has focused on ensuring access to water and sanitation for marginalized communities, notably tribal women in rural Odisha. He has also written and published research on putting the human rights to water and sanitation into practice at the local government level. Over to you, Mr. Bikash Pati. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for nice introduction. So my presentation today is little away from technology, more related to the community. So I'll be presenting on the issues pertaining to community level in a particular geography. So today I'm sharing the case of Bhadrak district. It's one of the coastal district in Odisha. Odisha is an eastern state of India, adjacent to Bay of Bengal. And this particular geography is infamous for frequent occurrence of disasters like flood, cyclone, and drought. So considering the proximity with sea and frequent occurrence of disasters like floods, seawater is surging towards mainstream, making more and more surface water bodies saline. Also, it's posing threat to sweetwater aquaculture because fishery is one of the prime livelihood of that geography. So coming to impact on livelihood, many agricultural fields are also getting affected by salinity, and agriculture is the prime livelihood in the district. And because of due to loss of livelihood, people are getting migrated. And it has also a greater impact on drinking water. Over a couple of decades, extraction of groundwater has been substantially increased in that particular geography. And it's not primarily because of drinking and domestic purposes, it's also because of irrigation purposes. So over extraction of groundwater has further increased saline contamination in groundwater. And there is hardly any step towards rainwater harvesting and groundwater recharging. Rather, in contrary, traditional surface water bodies are in decay due to increasing need of the land proximate to growing population. And to be noted that those water bodies were able to meet the water requirement for domestic purposes, especially in that particular geography. And looking into the current water supply system, especially for drinking and domestic purposes, it's more tilted towards groundwater-based supply rather than looking into surface-based water supply. So it has several threats. So small and marginalized farmers dependent on agriculture are losing their livelihood, and of course that is leading to migration. The migration in the geography is dramatically increasing every passing year. And considering the increasing salinity in the agricultural fields, saline water aquaculture has started increasing in this region, particularly the prawn culture. And this is also attracting a kind of rich people to get into saline water aquaculture, since this is a very profitable business. And rich people are in the process of grabbing the agricultural land of small and marginalized landholders, pushing them further to the poverty. Then saline water aquaculture, by promoting saline water aquaculture, the lands, especially the agricultural lands, are being converted to water bodies. And once those lands are being converted to water bodies with load of saline water for aquaculture, there is hardly any chance to get those land back to agricultural purposes. So all the stated events, both natural as well as man-made, is creating threat to groundwater, and more drinking water sources, primarily which are based on groundwater, are getting contaminated by salinity. And the intensity or amount of saline contamination is again gradually increasing every passing year. And it has a consequence that people who are residing in that particular geography are becoming water-starved. So this is also disturbing the equilibrium of power dynamic within the community. So because of the access to resource and economics within the geography, rich people are getting further richer and poor people are getting further poorer. And as I told, migration is dramatically increasing, and migration has several consequences like loss of education of children, other social and economical as well as health related threats. So we tried certain intervention there to break the nexus. So one of the intervention is that creating a resilient drinking water system that will ensure that community is not deprived of drinking water. Then developing a kind of proper drainage lines as well as rehabilitating the community level buffer zones. Those are originally there within the community. That has started helping absorbing the flood water. Including the saline water flooding, which will eliminate the threat of saline water flooding in the agricultural field. And certain level of land development also we have tried there, especially the embankment around the agricultural lands, which will help in eliminating threat of saline water flooding into the agricultural fields. Then creating farm ponds for ensuring water available within the agricultural field instead of depending on existing irrigation system will also help in maintaining the fertility of agricultural land. And of course, that will eliminate the threat of saline water flooding through the established irrigation channels to the agricultural field. Promoting rainwater harvesting at scale will also ensure that fresh water is available at the community, as well as that will also reduce a kind of load on groundwater. And of course, that will not further contaminate the groundwater through salinity. And creating a kind of cooperative among small and marginal farmers so that they also get into saline water aquaculture, especially in the lands which are already converted for that particular purpose. So this will also help breaking the power dynamics based on the resource availability among the community, and will also reduce migration and related consequences. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bikash Pati. Now our final presentation, we have a joint presentation by Ms. Juliet Willets and Ms. Avni Kumar. Just as an introduction, Professor Juliet Willets specializes in applied research to inform policy and practice in international development. Her achievements have been recognized by multiple international, national, and UTS awards, including as a finalist in the Australian Financial Review's 100 Women of Influence and a winner of the International Water Association Applied Research in Sanitation Award. She holds a PhD from the University of New South Wales in environmental engineering. She adopts a transdisciplinary research approach, drawing on science, engineering, public health, and social sciences to co-produce knowledge with relevant stakeholders. She is co-author of 9 book chapters, more than 100 peer-reviewed journal and conference articles, 80 other conference publications, and more than 120 industry research reports, public publications, and guidance materials. Ms. Juliet would also be supported by Ms. Avni Kumar, who is Research Consultant, Institute of Sustainable Futures at University of Technology, Sydney. Ms. Avni specializes in water, sanitation, and hygiene, WASH, with a cross-cutting focus on climate resilience and social inclusion in WASH. She has a background in development economics and has over 7 years of experience working in various capacities with government, civil society, private sector, and multilateral organizations. Ms. Avni has been a part of several projects related to climate adaptation in WASH, gender dynamics in the WASH workforce, as well as promoting equality and inclusion in WASH programs. Over to you, Professor Juliet and Ms. Avni. Thank you.
Thank you, Asif. All right. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody who's joined today. Welcome to this session. My name is Avni Kumar, and I'm from the Institute for Sustainable Futures, calling from Laos today. I'm joined today by my colleague, Professor Juliet Willets, and we will be sharing insights from a landscape study on climate change and urban sanitation. So various climate hazards ranging from slow onset events such as sea level rise and droughts to shocks such as floods and cyclones, as well as increasing unpredictability of weather patterns, pose a huge risk to functioning of sanitation systems and services. Such scenarios highlight the weaknesses in the various parts of the sanitation service chain and the critical need for increased resilience. So the context of urban settings in low and middle income countries with high population densities, reliance on on-site sanitation systems, and increasing climate-induced urban migration further adds to these challenges. And the various failures of such sanitation systems during extreme weather events have been linked to increased health risks, including pathogen exposure. So the landscape study provides a consolidated view of the priorities of multiple diverse stakeholders, and these include national and city level governments, utilities, international agencies, researchers, implementing organizations, as well as urban development and climate actors. The primary study focus was on climate adaptation and resilience across the urban sanitation service chain, and climate mitigation was included, however, to a limited extent. So the current focus to address climate change in urban sanitation was found to be concentrated around policy and strategy planning, technology and infrastructure, and service delivery and management, with some focus on institutional capacity building, coordination amongst different agencies, and consideration to environmental aspects. And lastly, there is very limited focus that we found towards monitoring and learning for continual adaptation efforts, financing mechanisms, engaging with users, and strengthening accountability mechanisms such as regulations and legal environment. So the study revealed promising efforts around the leading edge of institutional aspects. These included national level integration of climate and sanitation policy and planning, examples of productive cross-sectoral coordination and recognition of the value of diverse partnerships in order to solve this challenge. There is also growing momentum driving organizational level commitment to deliver climate resilient urban sanitation through their internal strategies and guidance material. And efforts are also underway supporting institutional and regulatory reform. On financing, there are initial efforts underway with the water and sanitation community, engaging with climate finance actors to highlight the specific needs of urban sanitation and supporting government partners to access climate finance. We also saw emerging research on different ways of measuring resilience, activities to identify the additional costs of resilient sanitation infrastructure and how can these be financed better. In terms of infrastructure and service provision, there are some good examples on using digital technology to incorporate climate hazards in infrastructure planning. Organizations are exploring adaptable infrastructure options, undertaking risk and vulnerability mapping, and local level governments and NGOs are working to adapt management of service delivery to better deal with climate hazards. And lastly, with respect to user engagement, organizations are exploring communication strategies at the community level to build awareness about climate risks and capacity to cope, adapt, and respond to different climate hazards. And other efforts promoting local ownership included learning from user preferences, their experiences, as well as other community adaptation strategies. So with that, I would like to invite Juliet to take us through the next part of this presentation.
Thanks, Avni. So I'll just continue on. So we also asked this range of stakeholders about the most significant challenges that they faced. And these are the top priorities from the different city and country stakeholders. So in the area of institutions, policy and planning, they said it was the lack of coordination across policies, particularly interrelationship between disaster as well as between climate and sanitation. And then concerning financing, at the local level, the concern was really that the budgets that they have, they don't yet account for these additional costs of adaptation. And those additional costs are both for capital costs as well as operational costs. Against infrastructure and service provision, there was a lack of understanding kind of at a broad level of really what would it mean to try and deliver climate resilient and inclusive sanitation across a city, that the problem seemed so huge and unwieldy to even start on. And then against user engagement, there was a sense that local level data and data generated, particularly in informal settlements, wasn't yet really being used to help inform decision makers about what actions were needed. So we then developed a knowledge and research agenda, and we thought through the different ways that knowledge and evidence is used by society. So it can be used to convince policymakers to act, which is one of the key things for the urban sanitation sector. It's needed to inform policy development. At the local level, it's needed to inform implementation. There's also a need for academic research. So we divided up a knowledge and learning agenda against these different areas. And on the next slide, we'll talk through just a few examples of the types of areas that people felt that evidence was really needed. So in terms of sharing experiences across countries and regions, people were asking to hear examples from other countries about successful cross-sectoral coordination, about what adaptation looks like when it's successful or even when it's not successful. In terms of evidence to convince policymakers, this is more numbers data, so numbers of people with low sanitation service and yet who frequently experience climate hazards. And then evidence to inform policy development. Here we need better ideas on the financing costs, and particularly the additional cost to build more climate resilient infrastructure and to manage it in a resilient way. The combination of research and implementation is something that's very much needed, given we need to have rapid learning cycles. So we need to try new things, and we need to at the same time learn about them, document them, and have rigorous testing of them, whether that be new technologies or new approaches to management or to user engagement. At the local level, data collection is needed just to understand impacts and damage to the different parts of the sanitation chain. It might be at the household level and their containment systems, or it might be the emptying process of sludge, or it might be at a treatment system. And lastly, for academic research, there was a huge range of topics where people said that new evidence was needed, but one in particular was about how we can manage the trade-offs as we try to achieve both mitigation, because emissions from sanitation systems are something that can be reduced, and at the same time make sure we're focused on adaptation. So moving on, the main implications of this study for the sector, we brought them down to 4 kind of key ones. The first is that we need to keep engaging with climate dialogue and policy, because urban sanitation and sanitation in general is often absent. I think we've succeeded in moving water onto the agenda, but I'm not sure that sanitation is yet there. Secondly, there's a need for some strategic thought leadership and coordination of messaging about how we approach adaptation in the urban sanitation sector. Thirdly, there was a lot of interest and demand for communities of practice and networking to share knowledge and exchange, whether that be between city officials in one country wanting to hear what's happening and the experiences in another, or whether that be between implementers and researchers. And also that we can possibly look at what the common capacity building needs are and build new curriculum and online courses to help build capacity quickly in the sector. And lastly, even though Avni mentioned there are small examples of intersectoral coordination, this is an area which I think, and it's across all the speakers today, that we see the climate change demands of all of us. Like, we can't work in our different silos anymore. And for sanitation, there are links to water supply, there are links to agriculture. We need to build the relationships that can help those sectors be better coordinated. So lastly, I'd just like to thank the many contributors to this landscape study, and to let you know that we're almost finished the report. So we would have loved to put the link on the slide, but it's not quite there yet. But we'll be sharing that soon, and we'll be happy to share it with anyone interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avni and Professor Juliet. Very interesting, and we look forward to getting the link to the study. I think with this, we move to the final section of our session, which is the Q&A panel. We have already received a number of questions, and I would just perhaps go with in the same order as our presenters, and perhaps I'll start with my first question to Dr. Hanasaki. So Dr. Hanasaki, question for you. In your presentation, you mentioned that active participation of private sector is a key to address global water issues, which is indeed extremely important. Can you elaborate on what do you mean by active? Do you see the private sector playing a role of end user, or also be engaged as a data provider, hence sharing relevant data?
Thank you for the question. Mainly that I'm looking at the private sector as the consumer of the resources and then provider of the commodities, and then economic activities, and then employment and so on. Actually, the impact or influence are quite large, particularly for the large big global companies, global large companies. So that that such a global big companies are really interested into or involved into the securing the water issues. So yeah, and then I think that the researchers or the consultants and engineers should have the support that such kind of the actions toward the more sustainable production and economy and business. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hanazaki. My next question is for Dr. Faisal Muin Kamar. Dr. Faisal, the use of Earth observation for agriculture is very promising as it allows global coverage. However, what is your experience with the issue of resolution for the applications you have highlighted?
So resolution has been an issue some time back, but most recently, since 2016, we have 10-meter spatial resolution, freely accessible data available. So 10 meters functions well at most of the agriculture systems, except some of the mountain, highly fragmented regions. So that's about the yes, there are two forms of observation data. One is data related to climate. So climate data is now, I think, at sub-region level, it is available at 5-kilometer resolution. And that is the driver. But if you want to see the impact, which is agricultural fields and agriculture assets, there we have 10-meter spatial resolution. I think since 2016, the spatial resolution is not a major challenge. So that's how I'll phrase it. Like, for example, I mentioned about our assessment, flood damage assessment in Nepal during October 2021. So there we were able to map almost all individual fields inundated under flood within the 48 hours of the flood happened. So that was sort of the damage assessment which is possible. And similarly, we have possibilities to look at the yield and yield assessment, drought-related damage assessments. I think that's not a major technical challenge at this point of time.
Okay, thank you. It's very good to hear, Dr. Faisal, about the quality of the system, and that resolution is not as big of a challenge as perhaps in certain areas. My next question is for Mr. Michael Eastman. Michael, as one of the next steps, you have mentioned the possibility to extend the analysis to other countries. You mentioned Malaysia, which is of course important to make it a general applicable methodology. Do you expect any issue in doing that? And if so, can you elaborate on some of the difficulties you may encounter and possible workaround?
Yeah, so it's a good question, actually, and because it's effectively touches on the reason for doing it, which is, yes, we do totally expect these kind of complexities and these differences, and exploring these differences would be quite critical to understanding, again, that kind of relationship between the indicators and the impacts, how that changes and how we can better use that to kind of monitor and evaluate these products. In terms of challenges of rolling it out, one of the biggest challenges we found was actually the data acquisition itself. Kind of touches on the resolution again. So actually the resolution of the indicators themselves, it does pose a challenge. But the more major challenge was more the resolution and the availability of the impacts data, and the length of the record. So it's one thing to have a high spatial resolution, it's another thing to have a record that goes back 30 years, which was a particular challenge. So actually understanding what impacts data we have in places like Malaysia or Indonesia is quite critical for understanding whether or not we can evaluate these relationships there. So yeah, no, there likely will be some challenges along the way, but we welcome them.
Thank you. I think maybe there is another related question. and perhaps I'll just maybe, if you don't mind, ask you one quick other question. Are you getting better at making drought indicators more granular to make it usable for localized decision making?
Yeah, so it's a complicated question because it depends which indicator you're looking at. So, I mean, in general, yes, they are becoming kind of higher resolution. And they're becoming better at identifying these kind of localized effects. But whilst the availability of these products are coming out, we have kind of, as I kind of alluded to before, we have almost this lagged effect. It's one thing to have this indicator that's now available today, but actually to use it effectively, we kind of need to have had it for at least 10 years so we can really identify these and start to correlate them properly. So yes, it is getting better. And then, as I say, it depends which indicator. I showed SPI and SPEI, which are generally quite good and getting better with kind of the better availability of remote sensing products. But we also looked at SSI. So this is the streamflow equivalent of SPI, a standardized streamflow indicator. And that's something which we need a good length of streamflow data availability for this. So it's not something where we have the availability across the whole country. Generally, we're looking for gauging stations that have high quality, long record data. And these can be really promising for identifying droughts and identifying impacts in areas that depend on irrigation or depend on storages and reservoirs. However, this data, whilst of course it is getting better, it's still, the availability of this data is still quite limited.
Thank you, Michael. I think if I can move to the next question, which is for Mr. Bikash Pati. Mr. Bikash, in your presentation, you discussed in detail the issues faced by communities in Odisha related to salinity, intrusion, and scarce freshwater resources. You've also mentioned possible solutions. What do you see as major obstacles in implementing these solutions, and what could be possible enablers?
Obstacle, definitely, as I told, that there is a kind of power dynamic there. So those are there. Government flagship programs, which are, again, it's not possible to reach the last miles, but the enablers is that, community are more aware of the issues they are facing, and that has a direct impact on their life and livelihood. Yeah.
Sorry. There is an additional question from Juliet. Did sanitation come up in the work you did, and if so, how?
Yeah, of course, like we are also working in sanitation as well. Sanitation is also a major issue there. And sanitation is not just confined to what you can say the fecal sludge aspect or ensuring there is no open defecation. It's also about environmental sanitation. So first of all, the technologies promoted in India for sanitation purposes is not fit for that kind of geography where there is a kind of waterlogging issue. So that is also what you can say added quality related issues to drinking water as well. Other than the salinity, bacteriological contamination issue is high. Then also this what you can say ensuring waste management is a challenge because of waterlogging and remoteness. Yeah, we also tackled that. We promoted terrain appropriate sanitation technologies, facilities, and mostly we focused on in situ solutions, not for bigger type of FSD. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My next question is for Avni and Juliet. Among the way forward, you have mentioned the need to create synergy between adaptation and mitigation. Would you have specific suggestions on how to do this, and possibly in which fields, applications specifically?
Sure, I can take that one. So Yeah, the background to this is that a recent study in Kampala showed that there were much, much higher emissions from on-site sanitation services than expected. That it was actually a large proportion of the city's greenhouse gas emissions. And what they found was that it is the anaerobic processes of sludge sitting in wet tanks that emits the most methane and nitrous oxide. And so I guess what's nice about it in terms of creating a synergy is that we want to move that waste and have more desludging for adaptation, because doing that is likely to prevent overflow from those tanks when you have flooding, for instance. And at the same time, if you're moving that, you're also going to reduce emissions. But it might not always be that you have win-win. And so I think hence why that was brought up as a real area for research, because where it's win-win, it's fantastic and we can go ahead with that. But there may be other situations, for instance, where for emissions reduction, for instance, you might need to implement a more expensive treatment plant that a government doesn't have the funds for. And from an adaptation perspective, it might be more important just to build something that's cheaper, that still has those emissions, but at least you have a treatment plant in place. But you're going to contribute to emissions. So I think one of the things those of us working in the sector are a little bit concerned about is that we don't want mitigation to prevent people from working on sanitation and to think, oh, I won't build the treatment plant because then I'm going to create emissions, because already that fecal waste is creating emissions somewhere. It just might not be measured. So I hope that gives a few ideas about how we might optimize.
Thank you so much, Juliet. Avni, would you like to add anything, or what are you going to say?
I was actually going to offer to speak to the question to all speakers, if that's okay. That's currently not addressed. So shall I go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
So there was a question about communicating risks to the decision makers and planners. And we came across a few really good examples of countries doing this very well. So including sanitation in their climate action planning processes, for instance. And in particular, I would like to share the example from Nepal. So organizations from Nepal shared that they were successfully able to integrate targets for sanitation in their nationally determined contribution plans. So that was the process behind that involved facilitation between the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Water Supply to kind of integrate these targets in the country's NDCs. And it was quite an intensive process facilitated by this organization called Global Green Growth Institute. And the background involved, collecting, basically building the case for having urban sanitation in the, climate targets, and sensitizing water and sanitation officials on the potential benefits that in terms of access to climate finance, and building their capacity as well to present their case to the Environment Ministry. So that was one way that, the risks of climate considerations were built into national level planning processes. Hope that answers the question, whoever posed it. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Avni. And this is a great example. But perhaps for maybe the audience who may not have seen the question, just for their benefit, I'll just read it out. And this question is for all the speakers, and maybe I would request the other speakers also and their views. So the question is, can you share your experience in bringing these risk assessment tools to the attention of planners and high-level decision makers? I wonder if the risks are communicated adequately. So maybe if I can ask Dr. Hanasaki again, have you seen, about the risk of not being able to, the private sector understand some of the findings really well, and hence translating it more in simplifying it in some ways, or something in a language that private sector understands? Has it been raised to the attention of planners and high-level decision makers? Yeah.
Yes, I'm always feeling to exchange an idea with on the drought or the water scarcity. It's quite difficult. First that water scarcity stuff is very hard to measure or to monitor and then quantify it. And then usually that the water scarcity is expressed by that index or that some very conceptual index. And then these indexes are easy to calculate and show, visualize, but sometimes that to convey that the background or the true meaning of the index is always very difficult. And then because that the index is conceptual, it is also very difficult to link with the direct or the concrete actions of the stakeholders. So always that I feel the difficulty in then communicating the risks, and in particular the drought or scarcity, water scarcity risk. Anyway, so that the most important thing is to continue the conversation and learn each other and understand each other. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I have something to add here.
Yes, please go ahead. And
since Hanasaki was talking about drought indices, we had similar situation in drought assessment in Afghanistan in 2021. So our indices were pretty bad, and then we can only say it's bad, worse, or whatever. But then we needed to communicate it to higher level that what it means. So when we looked into 2018 drought conditions, which resulted into 150,000 perishing of animals. So the current assessment was more severe than 2018. So by comparing those indices or visuals with the higher authorities, it was easy to communicate the impact. So that was sometime you need to change the, like what I mentioned earlier, that we need to use impact language instead of our technical assessments. Another example on these floods, we have urban floods more common in these days. And now slowly, gradually, these VASA authorities are being engaged in understanding that what it is, if there is 300 millimeter of rainfall in 24 hours, what it means to infrastructure in the city and assets in the city. And I think that's very important that we use impact language and then also engage different sectors in evaluating those impacts. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Faisal. This is a great, I think, term, need to use impact language instead of technical language. I think it's coming out very clearly based on your, Dr. Hanasaki, as well as Michael's presentation also. Michael, I mean, can I please ask for your, response to this question?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, this was really our focus, really. We very much worked quite closely with stakeholders to understand, okay, exactly what about drought and what exactly about drought impacts are we most concerned about, so we can ensure that we kind of set off talking in the language that we're interested in and focusing on what we're interested in. But I completely agree. I mean, whilst we have that and whilst that's the focus, you can't separate that from the indicators, which are inherently, as you say, Dr. Hanasaki, they're conceptual. They're not the easiest thing to kind of visualize without actually having played with the numbers yourself, I suppose. But yeah, no, that was quite a critical part of our research, was identifying which impacts and kind of what about those impacts are most critical to our stakeholders. So we had a variety of different things we could have looked into, but it was something as simple as yield, which was where kind of was the easiest to communicate and where the biggest kind of concerns were. And also marrying that with the kind of the data availability and the data quality. So yeah, critical, and I suppose the focus of our research, but didn't simplify it much.
Okay, I guess it, as you mentioned earlier, I think it's an iterative process. It would happen over time. If I could ask Mr. Bikash Pati, if he could answer the same question, please. And if you like, I can repeat the question.
Yeah, no, basically, informing policymakers, yes, we do, but we have not a kind of defined tool to assess the risk at the community level. Like I was telling about that migration is the issue, occurrence of disaster is the issue, then how the agricultural lands are being converted to saline, and there is a gross loss of agricultural land as well as agricultural productivity. So those are different issues pertaining to the community, and we do assess those involving all stakeholders, and with due evidence and data, we communicate it to each individual wing of the government who are responsible for that particular issue. And also we try to influence at a higher level that how the policy related to climate change and the action plan which the higher level is producing should actually address these issues. So should have the components to address this issue. So that's how we are working.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bikash. If you don't mind, maybe I can ask you. There are a number of questions actually for you, so maybe I'll just ask the next question. The holistic approach you described to break the nexus is interesting, and I imagine that a water food approach has a multiplier effect on community benefits. Have you tried to quantify these multiple benefits, and if so, can you describe the methodology you used?
Yeah, we have not quantified all benefits, though we assume and we experience through interaction that there are multiple benefits, but certain benefits definitely we have measured. First is that I was telling about that there is a dramatic increase in migration. So we track that, again, involving the concerned department of government who is responsible for ensuring livelihood. So we track that, that there is a reduction in the number of migration and the pattern of migration. We also looked into availability of drinking water as well as the quality. Yes, saline related quality is not visible as of now because the intervention is for 3-4 years. But bacteriological contamination issue has been addressed because sanitation was also one of our intervention area. We looked at safe drinking water is available at the community level. We also track the landmass which is getting affected by saline flooding, and especially the agricultural land. So whether that's increasing or not, and whether there is a lesser flooding and there is proper channel to pass the saline flood water to any buffer zone kind of thing. So those we track. And methodology is basically the primary data collection along with involving existing tracking mechanism of various wings of the government. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Understood. I think the next question again to you, and it is that experience in other parts of Asia shows that badly managed prawn farms are like an aquatic version of slash and burn agriculture. Prawn cultures are, as a monoculture, are highly disease prone. Ponds may be abandoned after a few years and new ponds developed. This is detrimental to conventional agriculture. Moreover, abandoned ponds may become breeding places for Anopheles mosquito species that breed in brackish water and lead to serious malaria outbreaks. Are you observing this in Odisha?
Yes, absolutely. So there is a severe malaria cases, and it's increasing every year. Also, there is other disease like dengue. So yeah, that somehow has been established that it has a serious health consequences, and it is gradually getting intensified. And that's another area of our influencing to government, whether I can say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Faisal, one question for you. How can the tools be applicable in Bangladesh?
Actually, we are already engaged with Department of Agriculture Extension in Bangladesh. The tools we develop in Nepal are one specific tool is Rice Map Engine and Damage Assessment, which is very suitable for rice area estimation and damage assessment. That is being outscaled in collaboration with Department of Agriculture Extension. And then HIVA tool, which I mentioned, is already being used by Bangladesh Meteorological Department as suit of their flash flood forecast. So that's we are very much engaged, and we'll be happy to engage with other institutions as someone shows interest.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this brings us to this was the last question in our Q&A panel. With this, I would really like to thank our presenters today for their wonderful presentations as well as answering all the questions of our audience. I would also like to thank the audience as well as our young rapporteur for covering this, for reporting on this. We had some brilliant discussion, and hopefully some of these we can just take forward with us in terms of next steps where we can just work together and collaborate with our partners. So thank you very much, and I hope that you will have time to attend some of our other sessions also. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.